Thank you for joining us. Today is July 27th. It's about 5:34, and my guest today is Sue Baars, and we're talking about emotional deprivation disorder and some of the therapy techniques, ways to identify these things, as well as therapy techniques. Sue, thank you so much for joining us and sharing
Yeah,
with
my
us.
pleasure.
You've got so much great treasures to share with us. I was hoping if you would share with me a little bit about what you think, as a society and the woundedness. What is the biggest contributor or problem that is kind of leading people astray, if you will, where we're not even realizing that we're supposed to be connecting and affirming one another?
Well, I think one of the foundational problems that I see is that what I've encountered, and I think if people really look at it, they'd see it too, is that people in the culture, and I would say this includes Christians and Catholics, but the culture itself is not guided by something that is reasonable, and that we've sort of inherited from Descartes and from Locke and from a lot of the different philosophers from even back as far as I think it's the 18th or 17th century. And this we've inherited a way of thinking that nothing is objectively true, that it's all subjective. And of course, in the 20th century, with the advent of psychology and Freud and sort of a swing away from Victorian repression, which really wasn't a good way of living at all, there was this other pendulum swing to the other extreme, which said that feelings were everything. Well, you couple those together and say there's nothing objectively true, that you can't trust anything except, I mean, it used to be you can only trust your senses. Well, now you can't really trust your senses. You can only trust how you feel. So that feelings really take the place of reason. Now, they're not supposed to be completely superseded by reason on the other hand either. Reason, as St. Thomas Aquinas says, reason is there to guide the emotions, to tell us what we should do about how we feel. But nowadays, that's not the case. Is that feelings are everything. So feelings become truth with a capital T. And so people are misled because it's the old adage from the 60s of if it feels good, do it. They're misled and really, in a sense, I think, manipulated by the culture into thinking that that's where my happiness is. Now, the other piece of that is that that people are not, I've found that people oftentimes are not educated well enough and deceived by the culture, so they can't even follow an argument based in natural law. And so
Can you
we actually have,
explain natural law to those out there who don't know what natural law is?
well, I'd say a real good example of it would be is that it's the laws of nature. Like we look at anything in nature, let's say the most simple one I can think of off the top of my head is gravity. So the law of nature there is that when you throw a ball up, gravity pulls it down. And so here we have a very good example of nature has certain laws of physics that tell us how to live. Like if we jump off of a cliff and expect to just float down, well, reality is going to say that's not true. You're going to fall really fast and you're going to hurt yourself or kill yourself.
Right.
So when we don't even have a sense of that, when people
So you're
say, well,
saying
that's not even the truth,
so you're saying that's an objective truth. Subjective
that's
meaning,
an objective truth.
right,
Yeah.
not my opinion, but
Yeah.
it's just a fact. Okay.
Right. So we want to look at what is objectively true. Now, obviously, then we can move into other things which are not so apparent, which are like moral laws or intellectual truths or spiritual truths. And we could talk about God, but that would be sort of a different matter. But, even when we talk about moral laws, or we back up and say we talk about civil laws, well, why are those there? Those are there so that we can, like the laws of driving, so that we can actually get to our destination without having an accident or either us getting killed or somebody else getting hurt. And so we might have to learn patience and even practice some of the virtues and calm ourselves down in order to get to our destination. And so everybody has those same laws.
So people are
Well,
not agreeing with natural law. You're saying people are unable to accept natural law. Really, we've gotten so far that people can't acknowledge that gravity exists or that there's certain precepts that are objective truths.
Yeah, I've actually encountered a few people that disagreed with me that there was such a thing as gravity as an objective truth. And so when we're talking about different things in life that need to be acknowledged as true, people, what I found is that people do not, they've been so either miseducated or misled that they have this idea that whatever I perceive is the truth. So it doesn't matter what you think, it's what I perceive or what I designate it to be. And so then you can do whatever you want. You can say, well, I can have sex with all these people and have no consequence from it. Or, you know, I mean, it's really not living in reality.
Is that
or I can go ahead.
I was going to say, is that the premise for homosexuality then? Living out
No.
homosexuality, that they live by their emotions and their feelings, that there's no objective, reason for being a man or a woman. So therefore, since there's no reality to being a woman or a man, you might as well make your own truth up. I don't know. You're not really, or
Well, I would say there's a couple different aspects of that. One is the bottom line for, I think, for same-sex attraction, which is really the new term that we're using for homosexuality, is a severely unaffirmed state. That's what I think.
Really?
And
Why? How
probably
so?
a lot of people in the, well, because the person, it has to do with identity, it has to do with a sense of self, and there's other research that's been done probably in the last 20 years, particularly by a group of psychologists called NARTH, the National Association for Reparative Therapy of Homosexuality, and they talk about what is called, and I don't want to get too off track here, but what is called defensive detachment. So it is like that a person's gender and sexual identity really needs to be reflected in the eyes and in the person of the same-sex parent. So that, you know, a little girl needs to be affirmed by her mother and loved by her mother and shown what it's like to be feminine and to be a woman.
Right.
And a boy needs that from his father. And so when defensive detachment happens, the theory is, in the last probably about 30 years now, is that, let's say the boy or the girl says, the drive is still there to want that, but I don't want it because I've been so hurt by this person, or I feel rejected or abandoned that I won't want that anymore. I'm going to protect myself from that. So it's like you have two things going on. It's the drive for it, which is very natural for being accepted by the same sex, but now the child is shut off from that. I don't want to receive it from that person. The drive still happens, and the child grows up, goes through puberty, and that drive becomes sexualized. Now that's a thumbnail sketch of it.
Yeah.
The other thing that you're saying is, I think, is more. It's more in line with what we're talking about with the whole misunderstanding or lack of knowledge of natural law. Is the idea that a person can become transgendered. Like if I feel like I'm not my own gender, I really feel like I'm the opposite sex on the inside, then I'll just have a sex change. And that goes against everything that we're taught as Christians, as Catholics in particular, that we know that the body really is the sign of the soul, of the invisible soul.
Yeah.
And so in every aspect of myself, I'm a woman, I'm female. In every aspect of a man, whether he feels it or not, he is a man. And so when we say, well, the feelings dictate what the sex is, then of course the person in the culture can say, well, I'm going to have a sex change. But I would say we have to look at what is the meaning of that feeling and where did that come from. And I would want that to be explored long before a person ever considers a sex change operation, because I think on the one hand that's usually a psychological issue. There may also be spiritual matters involved in that, which we don't necessarily have to get off on, but I think it's certainly a psychological issue that needs to be addressed. And the sadness that I have over people who have had sex change operations, I think they have gone through a lot in their lives, and to come to that point, and I feel very deeply for them. But I've also talked to someone who's done research on that, and she said in her dissertation work, she said that she asked everyone that she interviewed who had had a sex change operation if they would do it again, and no one said yes.
Wow.
And so, it really is that's a very powerful thing to do, and there's no recourse. Once the person changes their mind or they are healed of that or whatever, it's like it's a done deal. So, to look, I think there's just a lot going on with that, with that issue.
Well, definitely. Chastity Bono. I did an article on Chastity Bono and her sex change that Oprah Winfrey had on her new O channel, and they followed her through that whole removal of her breasts and taking of hormones, and how she's helped to set up schools now for children to go to if they've even working with lawyers to establish laws protecting children's right to choose their own gender, and then going to schools that allow them to live out their chosen gender and even suppressing their natural body changes. So I guess that's,
and I think it is very sad, that and it's very frightening, I think, when people get to that point. But it also does speak to what we're saying, is that there's a real rejection of the reality of what the body says. And you can we look at the theology of the body, and the body speaks a language.
Yes.
It says something about how we are. It doesn't say exactly who I am as a unique person, but it says something about who I am, and then I want to respect that.
I like that, because as a woman, and we've got a little less than a minute here, as a woman, my body is called to receive. You see that. My interior organs that define my sexuality as a noun as woman says I am to call and receive. And Father Loy even talked about how the bones in my lower part of my arm have a curvature in them that men's arms do not. It allows me to pull things closer to my body than a man can. But because his arms are actually formed in a right angle, he actually has a lever action and the ability to, work and toil, the very thing that God had created his body for. So we have about 20 seconds, and we'll come back. We'll be talking a little bit more with Sue Baars about emotional affirmation or deprivation disorder, and hopefully touch on some of the unique emotions, and then possibly even some new research or some new therapies out there that she can give those dealing with this some hope. So stay with us with Sue Baars after the break. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. There's so many good nuggets that you're saying.
Yeah, there's a lot to say.
Especially the natural law thing, because I feel like I was wishing we would have had an opportunity to go back to that, because I just wanted to say that being somebody that is I study theology of the body. I've dedicated my life to studying it. I've completed 6 courses at the Theology of the Body Institute, and I speak on it and read on it and teach it. I just really wanted to talk more about how, to me, it seems natural law that when a man and woman's body comes together, life can come from that. And when you put 2 men's bodies together, that can't happen. So I wanted to just kind of address that whole, it makes sense then that if they can't understand that certain truths are part of our reality objectively, that of course we're going to start throwing out the truths about our own bodies.
Yeah, and you just make up what is truth.
Yeah.
And so then you have consequences for that. That's the problem.